Our first topic that will talk about financial services in the privacy first world, the DPDPA blueprint. And joining us on stage, well, we have some limited audience right now, but we will be inviting our speakers on stage with some unlimited round of applause. So let's welcome Mr. Shashank Shekhar, co-founder and head of consulting, The Digital Fifth. Let's put our hands together for him. Warm welcome to you, sir.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I think crowd will continue to build up early morning. Second day, typically you will have a slow response, right? But I think we'll get started. So we are getting into a very interesting era, right, of the data privacy. So from the European side of the world, GDPR and all this thing has been there, global data protections, regulations and all. But now it's in India, it has been like, for the couple of years, the discussion has been going multiple times that law has been put in place in the parliament, but finally it was passed in 23. Now it has become an act, right? Now the government has already released the draft rules that how the implementation going to take place. So this is really complex. I think every bankers, every NBFCs, including every Fintechs, including the technology guys, everybody is looking into that how do they build their processes and the frameworks to comply with the DPDP because it's going to apply to everyone. It's an act. It's not a single RBI regulation which only will apply to the banking fraternity, but it's an act. It applies to across the industry. So every participant to the banking processes, banking segment will get impacted with the data protection bills, right? So we'll try to look at that. What are the implications? How do typically you should respond? What are the things going to change? That's very important because if you look at it, when we have moved into the digital era of the world, things are very digitally managed. It's not paper-based, right? It's completely digital, the way you engage with the customer, the way you sell to the customers, right? So everything is completely digital, so how do you manage the data protection? Now look at that. Earlier relationship with the bank and NBFCs, if you look at it, it was built on the personal touch. Customer visiting the branch, customer knowing that, okay, this is the person who is selling me the banking services, and I am able to associate with them, right? Now that kind of things where that you identify. So, okay, so before that, we just try to understand that what are the different data that you need to have, right? So like you have a personal data for the customers, you will have identity related data, you will have biometric data. So biometric typically you may not be saving at your own premises, because typically you will rely on the UIDA kind of the infrastructure where that, but biometrics of the phone that you might be using, so bank may not be storing, but biometric is the data or your contact information, employment information. So those are the typically personal related data that banks may be holding. But apart from that, when bank interact with the customer over a period of, they generate lots of the data. And these data could be the digital and behavioral data, financial transaction, customer interaction, risk data kind of things, whether the high risk customer, the low risk customer. So multiple set of the data that you will be managing. Now you need to ensure that these data is well protected. Well protected, not only well protected, well used. When you say the well used, that you have been using it for the rightful purpose that you have get the data. And we have seen that the banks and fintech fraternity continue to get marred by the data breaches, and we have the recent case. So we will continue to have that kind of the risk that data breaches will have. Okay, so this I was talking about that how the trust is changing. Trust is moving from that individual personal-based relationship generated trust to the data-led trust. What do you mean by data-led trust? That how you are handling my data. So any customer will build a trust with that particular institution based on the way you are going to use the data. So that's the major transition is going to shape, and that's where the DPDPA is going to play a bigger role, where that you try to construct your trust around that. So customer interaction from the earlier days of the physical presence and limited communication has completely moved to the digital first or the omni-channel kind of experience. Service delivery has completely moved on the mobile based, where that customer can want to update the PAN, update the address, and everything can be done on the phone, right? He doesn't need to visit the branches. So customer also sharing lots of the data digitally with you. So how you're going to manage those data is continue to be a bigger challenge for you. Data handling. So earlier, like basic data, you take collection on the forms, you get it with signature, and that's where the DPDP is trying to differentiate and excluding the data which is in the physical form. Every data which is collected digitally or the data which has been collected physically but converted digitally, right? So those are the set of the data that primarily we are talking about. how you're going to use those data. So is data is the consent driven or not? You will have, I'll take an example, right? So today, if you look at it and go and download any mobile app for any financial institution, one of the things, first thing comes in the pop-up that is asked for the multiple access on your mobile phone, right? So from the storage to the camera to the gallery to the location, every data is being asked, right? But that's not going to be the case. You will have to give the data based on the consent mapped to the purpose, and lots of focus on the security and privacy. So that's where the world is changing, where the in-person touch relationship-based trust to the data-led trust. So data in the universe is just a snapshot for you to look at that how the digital data is getting generated with the banks or the financial institutions, right? So if you look at it, multiple digital products is getting generated, which are getting created and sold on the digital platforms, right? So these are standard products, but they are designed to be made available on the digital platforms. Be it on your neo banking account, so like completely digital saving bank account, FD account, which can be opened digitally, closed digitally, manage your digital lending, so like many of the unsecured lendings, BNPL kind of product, credit card, these are the things which can be sold digitally. So you have the multiple digital products, and now you have the multiple digital interfaces. When you talk about multiple digital interfaces, like you have banks' own digital platforms, like mobile banking, internet banking, all those platforms where the banks is selling those products to you. You will have the fintech apps, the fintech which is working in partnership with banks, right? So like, for example, Stable Money working with Suryodaya, so Stable can sell that every product of the Suryodaya bank on their platforms. So that's the kind of scenario. Marketplaces, you can go to the Policy Bazaar or Bank Bazaar, and customer can buy any product from any of the banks on their Policy Bazaar or bankbazaar.com, right? So it's the marketplaces, you have interfaces. SaaS platforms, embedded finance. In the previous session, I was taking an example, like how many of you use Money Control app? So Money Control app, you would have seen that now you can go and book the FD, right? So these FD, Money Control can't sell a FD, right? Fixed deposit product. So they have partnered with the banks on the back end. Their FD products they are selling on their news portal. So many third-party platforms or the embedded platforms are selling. So digital interfaces continue to increase, where the customer are being engaged for the financial institutions. And that digital engagement, all the relationships that are getting built with the customer across all the interfaces is completely been digital managed. So customer get onboarded on the platforms, eKYC, video KYC. Yesterday we heard about the face-based authentication, so you will have all the kind of authentication coming place. Customer uploading the data, integration, digital data pools, like you can account aggregator, you can pull the data, GST data, you can pull directly to your banking systems, right? So this is the way the universe of the digital is changing for the customers at the bank. And it's not only about banks, NBFCs, anybody you talk about it, any financial institution. So this is just one universal view. I'll try to give it to you. So if you look at it, the customer, which is a data principal from the Data Privacy Act perspective, you will have the regulators who are going to have the oversight and the compliance. If you like, the bank is in the layer which is primarily going to call as a data fiduciary. Their responsibility is to define the purpose of the data that is being collected, and they have to have all the responsibility to ensure that the data is being managed properly with the security. So they will have to ensure the data encryption, consent management, managing the data across the systems and the data lake. Now they will be partnering with the various banking as a service platforms. Like, say, for example, I give you example, I was giving Money Control. So Money Control may not be directly integrating with all the banks, their FDs they are selling on the platform. There could be an intermediary in between who may be partnering with the banks across and getting their FD products and giving it to Money Control for their platform. Look at the complexity of the banking is emerging, right? So you will have the banking as a service, then you will have the third-party security platforms, like you will have the Karzas of the world or the Hyperwise of the world or the LOS partners. These are the guys who are partnering, and primarily these are all cloud-based. And the data may be collected by the bank, but they may be getting stored on the cloud of these SaaS providers. So you are partnering with the various guys. Banking as a service partners are now partnering with the Fintechs, embedded finance players. I was giving an example. Then you will also integrating with the account aggregator third party. So entire the universe of the integration with the banks is continuing to emerge, explode. Now, when we previously looked at the entire the digital engagement ecosystem, bank need to be clear that what are the data I am collecting from, what are the interfaces, and from where that it is stored. Now look at that, it can be data can be stored at the TSP's level, where you may have partner for the KYC, and then certain data may be available on the KYC platform or the LS partner platform, the banking as a service, fintech as a these are the places that you will have the data stored, and you need to have the visibility around that. So that's the complexity of the world. But importance, I think I will not go, but we all know that we don't have a choice. We have to ensure that the data privacy is being managed. Customer trust, digital banking growth is very critical. Moment the trust gets broken about any data, it will have a derailment challenge on the digital banking, right? Business reputation, regulatory compliance, financial fraud, right? Because most of the fraud is taking place with the customers because somewhere the data of the individual has been leaked out. Today we all are being hearing about the digital arrest and all these things, kind of the cyber fraud. You'll see that the customer has already, the fraudster have all the information of customers' Aadhaar number, the mobile number, and all these things. And when they talk about, people feel that, yeah, genuinely somebody is calling. But they may not be realizing that these all the data has been breached somewhere in some systems that previously ecosystem that I was talking about. And this data has been made available to the fraudsters. So primarily all the data breaches will lead to some kind of the fraud. So you will have the data leakage issues. So these are the different. I think more is the challenge where the data privacy is coming into that data misuse or data right uses. Government, regulators primarily see that whatever the data that you are collecting is being used only for the rightful purpose. It is not getting misused, or it is not being given to somebody else who was not supposed to have the access to the data. So earlier where the data used to get exchanged between the various parties within the banking fraternity, but that's not going to be the case where that you can just share the data for somebody to cross-sell. So these are the places where you will have a challenge, right? Just quick overview. I think from the DPDPA perspective, it's already there, and I'm sure you may be knowing pretty well. So data protection officers, so these are like bank or the NBFC may have to deploy an additional layer of the governance structure in their organizations called a data protection officer, who will have the primary responsibility to ensure the data privacy. So he will be different than the CISO, right? Cybersecurity Information Officer. You will have data principal whose data is managed, the consent manager. This is a new additions where that government expecting that there is an intermediary coming into the place. Is primarily the tech-enabled intermediary will come, which will act as an interface between the banks and financial institution, as well as the data principal like customers, and helping them to collect the right set of the data with the rightful of the consent and map to the purpose. So consent manager, and simple example you can consider in the today world, the account aggregator. Account aggregator is a consent manager between financial information provider and financial information user, right? Then you will have the data fiduciary, which is banks who has. That's where that, in fact, sometimes challenge comes that, okay, fintech is on the place where that is engaging with the customer, and he is going to collect the data from the customer. So is that his data fiduciary, or is the processor? So bank, fintech, and the customer, who is the processor? So primarily, very simple principle, the person who is deciding, or institution which is deciding that what is going to be the purpose for the data, that is the primary data fiduciary. That's a very simple principle. So data processors, key control framework is speak on the consent management, data impact assessment, the security, and the data audits, right? These are the four major constituents for that. So I'll quickly go through it before that our next session gets started. So primarily you need to redesign the customer journey. So if you're going to implement for that entire the consent management and all these things, and then be ready for the data privacy compliance, you need to look at the multiple dimensions. You may have to look at that how you customer journey is designed, where that all the consent is being taken for, what all kind of the data, and is the consent is being very clearly communicated. Product may be go through redesign, huge impact on the tech integration and the APIs infrastructure. That's going to be the huge major change. Your entire outsourced vendor partner, fintech partnership management will change, risk and compliance, governance structure will go through change. So on the customer journey, when you look at, customer may not be very clear that how is their data is getting used. So today, if you look at the scenario, when I was talking about that any onboarding platforms, the banks or whether it's a fintech, when you download, it asks for the multiple access from your mobile phone, right? And customer is not clear that what purpose that he is giving all the access for the location, for the storage. But that's where that primarily it will change, that customer will have the clear clarity on the data usage. So what are the data is going and how the data is going to be used. Customer may not have any kind of the visibility today or any kind of mechanism that how does he can revoke those access. Okay, how he can withdraw, but tomorrow you will need to provide those kind of mechanism, self-service portal kind of thing, where customer can go and see that what are the access that he has given and what are the access that he needs to withdraw. From the product design perspective, you need to, today if you look at it, one time all kind of the access has been taken, and then in the backend you use and you try to exploit the data for the customer product design. But now you will have to very granularly design that consent. So say for example, if you are taking access to a certain data, you need to be very clear that is that data is really required for your product. If it's not required for your product, you may not need to have the data. Like say for example, mobile phone access, again, very simple example to understand. If you are asking a data for the location, and if you are not going to use any of that location data for any particular purpose, you are not supposed to have the data. So today excessive collection, but tomorrow it will be have all the strictly that what is the data you required for your product, that need to be have clear. Consent will act as an API layer. So consent is stored in the silos, or consent are not stored at all. Now you are taking in a consent from the customer in the digital journeys across the product, but you may not be storing in the backend also where the consent is being stored, where it can define that for this type of the data, this consent was taken from the customer and this is the time stamp for the consent. So you may not have that mechanism, or if it's there, it's stored in the silos, so which will move into that single layer of the consent, which will have the complete clarity that how the data is being managed. Breaches are detected manual reporting processes. Now this is one of the things which is going to be a major challenge, where that breach happens, you may not reporting it to the customers. Now primarily if you look at the rules, that you need to report it to communicate to each of the customers, right? What are the data breach has happened, what kind of the data has been compromised. So that's where the world is going to change. The vendor partnership, primarily that you need to have a very strong kind of the contract, very strong kind of the flow design, where that you will figure it out that what the data that need to be exchanged between both the party and what is the purpose of the data exchange. Yeah, so look at that now, your vendors, third party, like say for example, LOS partner, your fintech partners, you need to also very clear that how they're going to use the data, and you need to be continuously monitoring that how you are managing the data, what kind of controls that they are taking place. So these are the things, your risk and compliance view will completely change. You need to have that complete visibility of that what kind of the data has been stored and whether all the consent is there, what are the risks are there. So these are some of the things will change. And you need to continuously put lots of emphasis on the training and governance structure. Governance, additional data protection officer comes into the picture, who is going to redesign entire the privacy control and responsible for that entire the data controls, right? These are typical data governance structure that you may need to put in place when you are trying to comply with the data protection bill. Okay, so that's where the major change will happen. So strategic levels, the sponsor and the chairperson, so entire the board responsibility will have to define the framework that how do you typically build the controls around the DPDPA, then your the data governance structure will be there. Then working group collaboration between primarily the department heads, because department heads typically will influence that how the journey should be there, how the entire your data collection, what kind of the data collection will be there. So those are the things will define. And then you will have the operation levels, but I don't want to get into details. So what next for you, right? What next for the banks and the financial institutions to do that? It's not an easy exercise, right? Apart from the building the data privacy policy or the SOPs, world doesn't end there. You really need to go back, and I was talking about all the changes which are going to take place from the journeys to the product to the technology. You need to figure it out and then go back and build the controls framework, right? I think very important is to go back and look at each of your product and do the data journey mapping. So So look at that entire the journey, be it on your liabilities product, be it on the lending product from unsecured to secured, the credit card, look at the wealth product and all these things. And wherever the digital interfaces is there, whether it's on your platform or whether it's on the third-party platform, lay down the journeys, map, and look at that what are the data that you are collecting, map that there is a consent to each of the data layer, and then go back to and backend also look at the systems that whether these consent or these data has been rightly been captured and secured. So first thing first, most important will be to lay down your data journeys or the customer product journeys. Then you look at so that's why I was talking about the journey and the consent framework. And one of the major challenges going to be there is not only talk about that anything from today or the future, but also the past. Now, past all the data which you have collected, it's going to be a mammoth task to figure it out that for what all that consent that you would have taken or you would have stored. That's where so when you lay down the journey, you will start going back on the drawing board and then you will check that, right? So that will be that your entire the consent management framework. Then once you have understand that entire that journey and the data, then you go back and look at that key, what are the security controls are there in place which takes care of the data protections, right? So that's where that you look at that entire the control gaps, and that's where the data privacy impact assessment has been coined as a part of the DPDP Act, that you need to look at that what are my risk impact to the data. If you need to let me know whenever whenever the session gets started, we'll let you know. Okay, so and then accordingly build your policy, governance compliance, appoint the data protection officers, build a complete real-time integration, and when you are building the now then primarily the technology upgrades or technology revamp, right? So what do we mean by technology revamp? Because now it's asked about that laying down a consent manager as a part of the entire journey. So you are laid down the let's say today deposit journey. So deposit journey doesn't have any kind of the middleware. It's only talking about the integration with the Karza and all these things, and then KYC partner and all these things, but no consent manager. So you need to build that consent manager. So third party that you need to bring into the play. And these are all the technology changes you will require to do that. So these are the major impact that you will need to do that as an institution. With that, I'll take a pause. I know DPDPA is a very vast subject, we can go and go, but maybe if anybody has a question, I would like to pick it up. There's another session we are going to again on the compliance where that we'll talk about some of these dimensions, evolving dimension for the industry leaders. So maybe you can ask questions to them. Yeah, just give the mic to him.
So I know this is an evolving field, but do you already have a steady state workflow for different industries? For example, AMCs or securities companies or banks, do you already have a workflow mapped out at this point of time?
So the workflow is mapped, right? If you look at it, any deposit journeys or say for example loan journeys or the mutual fund journey, there is a workflow very clearly defined, right? Where do you need to take the KYC? Who are the partners of the KYC? Underwriting, what are the data that you need to collect? So workflow is very designed, is already been running on the banking platforms, right? Only thing you need to figure it out that at each important part of the workflow, where that you are collecting the data for the customer, where there is a consent structure in place or not.
So that's exactly my point. All of us are already dealing with those workflows, right? So do you have, again, obviously it's current with the time, right? So let me say February 6, 2025, you have I would say a jumbo workflow which says for a particular Indian bank, right? Can be any large bank or scheduled bank. You already have a workflow which defines and says these are the points where you need to stop and need to redo things. Do you have that already developed and ready for implementation or for checking?
Absolutely right points, because when we would have implemented the journey, you will have the workflow. What I'm looking at that key now from the data perspective, you just need to go back and look at it. You don't need to refine that workflow. You need to look at the decimal workflow. Okay, these are the data I'm collecting, and just go back and look at the backend systems. It's just more like in a cross verifications, right? You are just getting ready that to have the clarity. Absolutely, the workflows is there, it is in place, but just pick up that workflow and just try to do an assessment that, and that's where that you will realize that you may not have the consent. You will see that, okay, I'm taking a bureau data, and there is one single terms and condition which will ask that, okay, so many consent that you are taking. But in the backend, when you go back and look at the data, is there timestamp? So that's where primarily you need to figure it out. Yeah. So thanks. I'll take in a pause here and hand over to Priya. Please take over.